And, I usually introduce the speaker, but it's basically myself. So I'll quote Austin Powers and say, allow myself to introduce myself and be as Rico Suave as he was, right? So cool. Let me switch over to my talk about messaging. I'm excited because this is like the talk I give the least frequently. And it's been a long time since I've given it. So I'm excited to give it again. And then some of you are probably familiar with my background. For those of you who aren't, just so you know where I'm coming from, I coded as a kid. I was an electrical engineering major. My first job out of college was pretty technical. It was on submarine design. In hindsight, though, really it was just very technical product management, even though it was more engineering focused. And then after I did that, I knew I wanted to get more on the business side of things. So that's why I applied to business school. And I was fortunate to get in at Stanford. So that's what brought me out to the Bay Area. I've been out here ever since. When I was at business school trying to figure out what to do after graduation, I learned about this exciting new career called product management. And the more I learned about it, the more it sounded great. But I recognized that I had never done it. So I asked people, where's the best place to learn? And they said Intuit. So I was fortunate to get a job at Intuit and basically started my product management career there, which was great. And then after that, I went to startups as a product leader. I was also CEO and co-founder of my own startup. In 2015, I wrote the Lean Product Playbook. And for a long time now, I've been basically doing what I'm doing today, talking to groups of product people, training them and consulting them and consulting the companies. And I'm the founder of our group, and that's my URL. I've worked with a lot of different companies. And so in the context of messaging, I've seen a lot of different messaging examples, some good, some not as good. So I'm excited to talk with you about that today. And what I want to do is kind of ground messaging into the main framework from my book and my work, which is the product market fit pyramid. And so I just want to give a quick summary of this for people that might not be familiar with it. The product market fit pyramid is a way to think about what does it take to have a successful product. And there are 5 key hypotheses that you need to get right that are in the shape of a pyramid. And like a real pyramid, the idea is each layer builds on the layers beneath it, right? So the foundation of the pyramid is a target customer. Everything starts with, who are we trying to create value for? Who are we targeting as our customer? The next layer up is for that customer, what are their needs? And we're going to talk about this a bit more, but we want to focus on needs before we start talking about solutions and features. There's also this word underserved here, where you want to have an opinion about, hey, is this a well-served need or an unmet need? Obviously, if it's a well-served need, people are probably not going to be as big an opportunity as a need that's not met. But taken together, these 2 layers form the market. That's the market part of product market fit. And if you look in an economics or marketing textbook, it'll say, hey, a market is a group of people that share a set of common needs. So those are the market layers. The product layers are where you get to, really decide what you can do with your product. The first product layer is your value proposition. This is basically, in an ideal world, this is directly connected to the underserved needs layer, but we don't know how connected it is or not. And your value proposition is really, hey, what are we promising to customers? What benefits are we promising to customers that our product is going to deliver for them? And how is it going to do so in a way that's better or different than the competition? The next layer up after value prop is feature set. That's your functionality. So the way to think about that is, hey, customers use the functionality to enjoy the benefits in the value prop. This is where the concept of MVP, minimum viable product, comes in that I've covered in some other talks. I'm not going to cover today. And then finally, user experience, right? And then the way to think about this is users interact with the UX to use the features to get the benefits in your value prop. And product market fit is just, okay, we're targeting this market and we've made these decisions and executed on our product in this way. How much does what we've done, implement, how much does it resonate with our target market? And so messaging, in my mind, it really lives as part of the user experience. It's part of what people see when they interact with your product and your website or your app. And it's based on your value prop. So it really kind of, instead of like in the product world, when you think about it in the product world, once we get clear on our value prop, we proceed to feature set and UX. There's almost like a separate side path where we go into positioning and messaging that I'm going to be explaining today, right? So this is the common element. We don't want to have our messaging completely decoupled from the product. So the value prop is the common element where you can align your product and your messaging. And if we take a step back and think about the components of customer experience, there's obviously the functionality that you have, there's the UX that you have, and there's the messaging. And so I view these as 3 distinct components. So when you're evaluating, a customer experience, you can tease apart these 3 different components. And one of the things that I like to ask and think about is, hey, when somebody, when a prospect, someone who hasn't yet signed up for your product, when they show up at your landing page or your website or something, what do they see first? What is the first thing that they see? So here's an example of Evernote. This is an older version of their site, but when you go to the Evernote homepage, here's what you see, right? Am I seeing any features or functionality yet? I'm not, because I'm not logged in. I don't get a chance to actually interact with anything, right? Am I seeing the design? I'm kind of seeing the design of their landing page, not of their product itself. I can't interact with their product yet. So I'm mainly interacting with the messaging. Like, what are they telling me about their product? Because I'm not in their product yet. They're trying to explain it to me, right? And so here I can think, I think this is pretty effective. Capture anything, nice and short, 2 words. Access anywhere, and find things fast. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about problem space. And so these are great because these are great problem space statements, right? They let you know you can capture anything, access it anywhere, and then you can find it fast if you want to. So that's a decent example. A counter example, here's a somewhat older page from Acer. So Acer makes laptops, and this is their product page for this particular laptop. Now, I don't know about you, but that name C710-2055 really grabs me. It really speaks to me and makes me want to buy this laptop. And I know exactly what I'm getting when they tell me C7. Don't worry, we further clarify with NU.SH788.008. That makes everything clear now. If you were confused by this, it's like, unfortunately, you see examples of messaging like this. Like, this is the name of their product and how they're messaging. Like, what the heck do you have to go off of here besides the picture and the price? You have nothing to go off of, right? So one of the main pieces of advice, it's consistent with what I talk about when you're going through lean product processes, we want to think about and market benefits, not features, right? Most companies focus on features, and there are a lot of reasons why. We'll get into it. And there's that famous quote, people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole, right? So we want to focus on the needs. And so once you build this awareness up, you realize, oh my gosh, like a lot of these messaging and ads, the way people talk about their product, it's feature speak. It's not benefit speak, it's feature speak. And these are two different sides, of what should be the same coin. Things like 10th generation Intel Core i5 processor, right? Okay, I know it's a processor, I know it's from Intel. What the heck is 10th generation? It's newer than 9th generation, but what does that tell me? And i5, what does that tell me, right? It's like i5 means something once you know that there's i5, i7, and i9, and i5 is the lowest. But before you know that, again, think about it as a prospect who has no idea what's going on. Netgear, the AC2000. There you go, AC2000. What does AC2000 mean? I don't know. Infinity QX60, right? And again, our lovely Acer. So this happens all the time. And naming is the kind of the tip of the iceberg for the messaging, but it's not just the names that don't convey benefits or value. It's that. So I have an older example here that I need to update, but I haven't updated yet, which is when, the BlackBerry days. Okay, this is an example of a press release when they came out with their Torch 9800. And I just have a quote here. Okay, so here's the quote. With a 5-megapixel camera with flash, continuous autofocus, and image stabilization, plus 11 photo modes and video recording, it's easy to capture those spontaneous moments. So what I want you to do is just kind of let's micro-analyze that paragraph at the word level, like which words are feature speak and which words actually describe benefits, right? And then what we'll do is we'll just look at the ratio. Like they tend to talk more about features, they tend to talk more about benefits, right? And so I want you to think about what words are features versus benefits. And what I'm going to do is I'll color code. I think the red words are features, right? 5 megapixels, that's kind of feature speak, right? Flash, feature speak. Continuous autofocus, feature speak. Image stabilization, feature speak. 11 modes. Great. What are the modes? What do they let me do? I don't know. Video recording. It's just the last thing, easy to capture those spontaneous moments. That's where there's finally some consumer benefit. Oh, hey, you can capture those spontaneous moments, right? The rest of it is just feature speak. And so we have 6 features and 1 benefit. It's like a 6-to-1 ratio. So this is pretty skewed towards feature speak and not so much towards benefits. And the reason I have the BlackBerry example, if you're wondering why I have this old BlackBerry example, is because I want to, at the same time, a contemporaneous phone was the iPhone 4. And it was competing with it, right? And so here's Apple's description of it. Take beautiful detailed photos with the new 5-megapixel camera with built-in LED flash. The advanced backside illumination sensor captures great pictures even in low light. And the new front-facing camera makes it easy to take self-portraits, right? So again, think about which words are features in this one and which words are benefits in this one, right? Now they do have features, but they have basically a much better blend. And they usually lead with the benefit, right? They start off with take beautiful detailed photos. Right off the bat, they hit you with what's this thing going to do for you? Why do I care about this as a customer? And they have basically what they do is they link up mostly one for one. They have 4 features and 4 benefits basically, right? But you can see the balance, much more balanced and not as feature heavy as a BlackBerry Torch. And this kind of, this ties in directly with what I like to talk about a lot, problem space versus solution-based thinking. Some of you may be familiar with this. I just want to explain it for people that aren't. Problem space is basically a customer problem need or benefit that the product should address, right? If I felt like it was too hard to share photos with your friends, and I was like, I want to make it easier to share photos with your friends. That statement, make it easier to share photos with your friends, that's a problem space statement. I'm describing how I want to create value for people, what benefit I'm going to provide, right? I haven't said how I'm going to solve it. That's the idea, is you want to learn to separate problems from solutions, benefits from features, basically. And I'm sure many people on this call know the template for a well-written user story as a blank type of customer. I want to be able to do blank so that I can enjoy blank benefit. That last part, that's really the essence of problem space. Why would this be valuable to a customer? Why would they care about it? That's the idea, basically, right? Now, in contrast, solution space is a specific implementation or design to address the need. If the very next thing I said after, oh yeah, I want to make it easier to share photos with your friends, if the very next thing I said was, oh yeah, and last week I launched an app that does that, that app would be in the solution space. Or if my friend Sally, I hadn't done any coding, but my friend Sally was a designer and she gave me a set of mockups for the app, that set of mockups would be in the solution space. So those are product examples. You can also have features example, right? Where it's like, hey, we've got the configuration wizard, we've got the auto configurator, or whatever it is, right? You're talking about your features. And one thing that happens, actually, well, a couple of things. One is, I know the reason I share this is far too often teams jump quickly to solution space without spending enough time thinking about the problem space. That's the top thing. And I know why. We live in solution space, right? So the default way of thinking of everybody tends to be solution space, right? That's just how we're wired. And so as, effective members of product teams, we want to try to build up this awareness of the difference between problem space and solution space. Because one thing that can happen related to messaging is you start working on a feature and it gets some internal name, some internal handle. Oh yeah, we're working on the new auto configurator, And then what happens is when it's time to launch it, nobody says, hey, what do we want to actually, what do we want to call this thing to customers? And so that whatever the internal handle was, usually is what sneaks out, and that's what ends up getting called, unless you do explicit naming, right? Things like that. So the example that I like to give to illustrate this, to kind of make this point home, is that, when NASA was sending astronauts into space, they knew that the ballpoint pens that we use here in space wouldn't work in gravity, right? With no gravity. They need gravity to work. And so the first thing I need to say is, if you Google this, you end up on urban legend says, oh, NASA didn't do this, and NASA didn't pay anybody to do this. It's true. NASA didn't do it, and NASA didn't spend a dime on this. But when NASA's contractors on their own said, hey, you know what? I think we can invent a pen that writes in zero gravity. And he went off and spent $1 million of his own money, not NASA's money, and they invented a space pen, and it works. I haven't tried it myself, but you can tell because you can write upside down. It's got a gas canister that pressurizes and pushes the ink out without any gravity, right? Well, the Russians, they also had astronauts that had to write in zero gravity, but instead of inventing a space pen, they gave them pencils. And you can actually get a Russian space pen. It's just a red pencil in a box. It's a joke, kind of poking fun at this, right? So for a second, if this is the only real requirement, I'm telling the story a specific way. There are other aspects that I'm not covering. But if this is the main requirement that we're trying to focus on, and these are both equally good solutions, then the one that didn't take $1 million on time and effort is higher ROI, or it's good enough. We don't want to over-engineer, over-invest in things. But the real reason I tell a story is not that. It's just, it's really easy for solution space thinking to creep in when you're trying to stay in the problem space. And I call that solution pollution, right? And the top way to get to mitigate it is to ask people why, right? When the way this happens in your company is someone will be like, hey, I think we should add a drop down. I think we should build this feature. They're jumping in and proposing features, right? And so if you want to try to get clear on what problem it is, you can say, hey, what problem is that going to solve for a customer? Why would that be valuable to a customer, right? So that's the idea is, and tying it back to messaging, we want to do this in the product world. We also want to do it in the messaging world. Don't just sell features like the BlackBerry Torch did, right? Talk more about benefits like the iPhone, like Apple did with the iPhone. Now, one company that has a specific methodology to ensure that product teams start this way is Amazon. So Amazon has a press release technique that's pretty famous. or basically in Bezos's quote is, we start with the customer and work backward, right? So it's customer centric. It starts that way. And they have to basically write the press release before they start working on the product. So it's kind of like their version of a PRD or a kickoff doc or something, where they try to get everybody aligned. You know, and Amazon's big on doing things in writing at the beginning of their meetings. Everyone kind of sits down and reads the written summary. It's kind of funny. It reminds me of where I worked doing that nuclear submarine design. We were very much like that too. But, you know, it's not meant to be a product spec. It's really not like a detailed PRD. It's supposed to be short, you know, like less than 2 pages. And the guidance they say is it needs to use Oprah speak. What does that mean? It means like just something that you would, you know, someone who watches the Oprah show would understand. The average American would understand. You can't use jargon and terminology, basically. That's the idea. What is in their press release template? They have these 9 sections. The first is a heading. Name the product in a way that reader, your target customer, will understand. So we're not going to call it C270 because that doesn't make sense. I guess if you're a bounty hunter droid, we can call you IG88. That'll be okay. But other than that, these kind of cryptic number names are not good. Then a subheading, describe who the market for the product is and what benefit they get. 1 sentence only underneath the title, right? So you can see that. What's the benefit they're going to get? That's like the very first thing they say after the product name. Summary, give a summary of the product and the benefit. Assume the reader will not read anything else to make this paragraph good, right? This is where you're basically trying to sell your product. You're kind of saying, why would a customer want this, right? Why would they even want this? And then the next one is a problem. Awesome. I love that we're starting with a problem before we talk about the solution. We talk about, you know, we talk about a good, you know, what the problem is, and then we get into step 5, the solution. That's great. A quote from you, right? So this is kind of like a press release where there's a quote, you know, it's like if I'm the product manager, like Dan Olsen, the senior product manager for Amazon Alexa, you know, you say what you're going to say, and then how to get started, right? This is kind of cool because, as we all know, onboarding, most people know these days, is pretty important so that the person gets in, you know, the user gets started well with your product. And then a customer quote, which is great, right? So it's like, what is a response that we're hoping to get from a customer, right? And that, you know, that should, again, obviously you want the customer to be echoing whatever benefit or problem you think it's going to solve for them, basically, right? That's the idea. And then finally, closing your call to action, right? And so it's like, hey, you know, if you click here, just get the new Amazon Alexa or whatever it is. So that's the idea, right? So this is, again, this is specific to Amazon, but it helps people get grounded in who's the customer, what are the problems that it's going to solve before we get into, you know, into solution-based stuff. All right, and for me, you know, again, it starts, this common ground between product and messaging is your value proposition, that third layer in the product market fit pyramid. And the value prop addresses the questions, which customer needs will your product address, and how will your product be better than the competitors, right? And a key part of messaging is how are we going to be better, right? That's what we want to, you know, the first part helps you stay in the problem space. The second part is how we're going to be better. And if some of you have seen my other talks, you probably know that I like to use the Kano model as a way to get clear on your value proposition. So I want to explain that real quick. I actually studied this in a industrial engineering program that I did at night before I moved out here, that had to do with like quality management. And, you know, this kind of comes out from the auto manufacturing days of the 80s, where they were trying to improve the quality. And Professor Kano of Japan created this model it's a great model. And so I'll explain it real quick. On the x-axis is for whatever need, customer need we're talking about, how fully does a product meet the need, from not at all to fully meets the need. You can think of it like 0% to 100%. On the y-axis is as a result of how much the product meets the need, how much user satisfaction results, or how much user dissatisfaction results, right? So people can be happy based on how much the product meets the need. They can be unhappy. There's 3 categories basically of needs so really one way to think about the Kano model is it's a way to categorize your customer benefits or needs. The first and easiest to kind of get your head around is a performance benefit. The way to read this is like left to right, right? So basically, as the product meets the need more and more customer satisfaction is created. It has a positive slope, basically. That's the idea, right? Or conversely, if you go this way, as a product fails to meet the need more and more, then you have increasing customer dissatisfaction, right? So basically, this is a benefit where more is better, less is worse, right? If we end up speaking of microprocessors, right? The speed of the microprocessor is an important thing so that it works faster and gets things done faster. That's quantified by the clock speed in like gigahertz. if everybody else's microprocessor was 1 gigahertz clock speed and ours was 2 gigahertz clock speed, we'd be outperforming everybody by 1 gigahertz, right? So we'd be outperforming. Let's say I was shopping for a car and a new car, and I went into the showroom and there were 2 cars there, and they looked about the same. I liked the way they looked about the same. They had a spec sheet on the sticker. Specs looked about the same. The price was about the same. So everything's pretty much about the same between these cars. But then I started to realize, hey, on one of these cars, it has better fuel economy than the other car. It has like twice the miles per gallon as the other car, right? So it would be outperforming the other car. All other things being equal, I would probably buy the car with the higher miles per gallon, because for most people, fuel economy is a performance benefit feature. That's an example. More is better, less is worse. The second category is must-haves. Now, to read this, let's start on the right-hand side. Let's assume for a minute the product fully meets the must-have need. It doesn't actually make a customer happy. That's why it's down here. It doesn't come up here, because they are expecting it to meet the must-haves, right? And as you go to the left, as it fails to fully meet the must-haves, that's where people get increasingly unhappy, right? So that's the thing about a must-have. You can't actually make anybody happy, but by not having it, it makes them unhappy, and they probably won't use your product, right? Let's say, again, I was shopping for a car. I went into the showroom. I saw this car and I thought, oh my gosh, that car looks amazing. I love the way it looks. The price looks great. I looked at the spec sheet on the window. All the specs look great. But then I poked my head inside and I realized, hey, wait a minute. For some reason, this car doesn't have seatbelts, right? Even despite all the other amazing things about the car, I wouldn't buy it because I'd be afraid of getting hurt or dying if I were to drive it, right? So it's a must-have for a car. But if car A has 5 seatbelts and car B has 100 seatbelts, I don't say car B is 20 times better than car A. Once you have 1 seatbelt per person, you're pretty good. You're set. You're fully met. And then the third category is delighters. And so the way to read this is at the left. If you don't have the delighter, it's fine. It doesn't cause any problem because people aren't expecting it to be there. It's kind of like a bonus. But by having a delighter, also called a wow feature, it can create a lot of positive customer satisfaction. Not today, but if we go back, sticking with cars, to when the first cars came out with GPS navigation built into the car itself, that was a delighter, right? And if we think about what problem did that solve for people, it solved the problem of figuring out how to drive to where I need to go. And before GPS navigation was built into cars, what were the solutions that people had? Well, they would either use paper maps in their car, or they would stop and ask for directions, or they try to wing it and get lost, right? And then the first couple of cars have GPS navigation in it. You just put in the address of where you're going, fundamentally changed, how you got from point A to point B. It was a disruptive innovation. But then over time, as we know, more and more cars have GPS navigation built in. And then TomTom and Garmin came out with their add-on units. And now we all just use our phones. It's funny because so many cars still have a GPS navigation built in, but nobody uses it. They just use your phone instead. And that just shows you this isn't a static picture. It's a dynamic picture where these needs and features migrate over time. And the pace with which that happens just depends on the level of competition in your space, so that yesterday's delighters become today's performance benefits, become tomorrow's must-haves, right? And the thing about, a quick note on delighters is people think delighters, the first things they usually brainstorm for delighters are, oh, it's going to auto-magically figure out what you want to do and just do it for you. It's usually these like advanced AI kind of ideas that may or may not be feasible, probably going to take a lot of work. But the examples I like to give of simple delighters, one is a lot of us, and when we were travel for business, would stay at a hotel. There's one hotel chain in particular that when you check in, they give you 2 chocolate chip cookies, right? That's an example, and it's DoubleTree. Most people still remember it. It's like, that's an example of a delighter. It can be as simple as that. My most recent example of delighter is from Spotify. So I use Spotify, like I'm sure a lot of you do, and I listen to a lot of different music there, and I'm a Star Wars fan. And so the other day I was listening to a Star Wars soundtrack, and Spotify has a progress bar for the song, but when you listen to a Star Wars song, instead of it just being a green generic progress bar, it turns into a lightsaber. I guess pretty cool. That's a delighter, right? Didn't take a lot of time or effort. There was no AI involved. It wasn't like, multiple dev months of work to do that. And so why am I telling you about the Kano model? All you need to know is, hey, there's 3 categories: must-have, performance, delighter. And going back to the problem space, we're going to basically categorize the problem space and get clear on our value proposition grid. The way we do that, I've kept it generic here. We'll talk about a specific example in a sec, is for our product category, list 1 per row. What are the must-have benefits? What are the performance benefits? What are the delighter benefits? The next thing you do is you list your competitors. Here we have competitor A and B, and you have a column for your product, right? The next thing you do is you score. You want to do competitive analysis. How good a job is each competitor doing on each of these benefits, right? And honestly, high, medium, low usually works pretty well. You can use yes, no for must-haves and delighters, but high, medium, low works great, right? So what is this saying? This is saying competitor A is the best performance benefit 1, competitor B is the best performance benefit 2, and they're both so-so performance benefit 3, and competitor A has a unique delighter, right? So now this is where we have to decide what's special about our product. How are we going to be better? How are we going to create more value in the marketplace for customers than needs, right? Where can we win? What row are we going to be the best at? And I run this exercise in my workshop a lot, and it's very tempting for people to put a lot of highs in this column. High. Like we're going to be the best at everything. But that's not really feasible because you don't have the resources to do it. And secondly, it won't create a clear positioning in the marketplace, right? And so this is where I like to bring up the Steve Jobs quote about focus, where he says, people think focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on, but that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that there are. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things, right? And I like to just kind of paraphrase that by saying strategy means saying no, right? We've got to figure out our product strategy. This is really our product strategy. So given that, we might go with this as our value proposition. Of course, we're going to have the must-have like everybody else because we have to. We're not going to try to be the best at performance benefit 1. We're going to try to be medium there. We're going to say no to performance benefit 2, not worry about that one. And we're going to try to be the best at performance benefit 3, right? The other 2 competitors are medium. So there's a chance for us, there's an opportunity for us to be the highest. Maybe we have some good problem space benefits that we've identified a segment that really values those, or we have some solution technology ideas why we're going to deliver a better solution. And then we have an idea for our delighter, right? A delighter of our own. The whole point of this exercise, and whether it's for your product or for messaging, is to get clear on what are your unique differentiators, right? How is our product going to be the best? What are we going to be the best at, right? And usually it's one performance dimension. And if you're lucky, you have an additional unique delighter that nobody else has, right? Some advice here, you don't compete on must-haves. Every once in a while, I see a team launch a product that only has must-haves. If you go back to that chart, must-haves they don't create positive value. They don't get into the realm of positive value. Just by not having a must-have, it causes a problem. So you need to be the best on at least one performance benefit. And the thing about those performance benefits, if you notice, I mentioned gigahertz for clock speed and miles per gallon. You can usually quantify them. That's where most of the competition happens, on the performance dimensions, where you can quantify it, right? If you can also have unique delighter in addition, that's ideal. And if you can have both of those, if you can have a clear outperform benefit plus a delighter, it's a very powerful combination. And every once in a while, you see a product that just crushes it, and when you think about it, you realize this is what they had going on. So that's a generic example here. What I want to do is talk about a specific example of Instagram, right? And talk about their value proposition and their messaging. Okay. Now we're going to talk about Instagram, but not this Instagram. We're all going to get into Hot Tub Time Machine together, and we're going to go back to the year 2008. Why? 2010. Sorry. Why? This is what Instagram's logo was back then. And that's when they launched. So when they launched, there were already a lot of other messaging apps mobile photo sharing apps in the market, right? There were already a lot of them. And yet they came in and they quickly shot up to number 1. And I would argue that, you don't see that often, but every once in a while you see a new product enter a crowded market and shoot up to number 1. And I would argue every time that you see that, it's because they had such a clear value proposition, right? They created so much more value. You can kind of figure out how do they outperform, how they outdelight the competition. So what I'd like to see here is see if we can figure out what it was from the V1 Instagram. Not today. They have lots of features today, but from the version 1, what was it that, how did they outperform? What was their unique differentiators? How do they outperform or outdelight the other photo sharing apps? So feel free to unmute and throw out your answers or chat your answers, right? Okay, Greg in chat said filters. That's right. Okay, so filters. That's right. They had these amazing filters that the other apps didn't have. Now, one thing I like to clarify is, are filters a problem or a solution? What do people think? You can say it, you can unmute, you can chat, right? So Greg said solution. That's right. That's fine. No big deal, right? We live in solution space, so it makes sense. And so did Mark. It's a solution. So then all I do is I use that why hack and I go, okay, as an early Instagram user, why were filters valuable to you? Right. So let's see what people say. Somebody said, solve my blemish problem, right? Right. Any other ways people would say it? This is the thing about the problem space. People use slightly different words for the same idea sometimes. Anyone can be a photographer. Yeah, right. You know, usually I hear things like make my photos look better, make my photos look more professional, make me look better, make my photos look more interesting, unique. Great, cool. Greg just said unique. Exactly right. Those are all just slightly different ways of the general idea of make my photos look good, right? So that makes sense. So we've got the problem, make my photos look good, solved by the solution filters. Cool. And then at the time, next question, were filters a performance or a delighter when they first came out with Instagram? What do people think? Look better than my friends. Nice. Okay. What do people think? Yeah, a couple, 3 people, 4 people said delighter, right? Because you weren't expecting it, right? You at that point in time for a mobile photo sharing app, you weren't expecting these amazing filters, and so it kind of was a delighter. Now the interesting thing is that was back in 2010. If we were to launch a new mobile photo sharing app in 2022, would it have to have filters or not? It would, right? We get laughed out of the app store. Look, unless we were trying to do like some retro app and be super cool by being super retro, right? So remember I mentioned how these things evolve over time. So Instagram filters launched as a delighter, but then they quickly got copied by everybody else in the space so that it became a must-have, basically, right? So good. Okay, cool. So we got to make my photos look good. Any other things that they did to make your photos look good, or any other things they did that outperform? And so again, the thing about outperform, it's something you can quantify, right? Some way to measure and say, oh, look, we can measure how these guys did a better job, or something else that made your photos look good. There's something else they did that's a little more subtle to make your photos look good, not as obvious as filters. I'll give people a chance to see if we chat these ideas. And again, I know it's from 2010, so it was a while ago. So Bart said faster photo sharing. And yeah, so that's kind of getting to what the issue was. So, you know, the idea basically was the way these apps work is you launch the app, it would have the camera come up in the app basically, right? And then you would take your photo, you line it up, you take it, and then it would render the image in the app, and you do whatever you're going to do with the filters and all that, and then you'd hit upload, right? And you could actually time how long it would take to upload. Like most photo sharing apps, it would take like 5 to 8 seconds to upload the photo, right? But if you timed it on Instagram, it was noticeably like 2 or 3 seconds faster than the other apps. Like you could just take a stopwatch and measure it, and it was consistently 2 or 3 seconds faster on the photo upload than all the other apps, right? Now, we probably have some technical folks on the call that are going, wait a minute, Dan. So, it's the same phone. So let's talk about 2 photo sharing apps on the same phone. It's the same phone. So it's the same camera with the same megapixels. Therefore, the photo size is the same, regardless of the app, right? So whatever megabytes it is. And then the bandwidth is the same, whether you're on 3G or Wi-Fi, it's the same. So that's the same. How about compression? Do they have some crazy Weissman score compression that nobody else has? No, it's the same compression, right? So if it's the same file size, same throughput, same compression, how the heck are they breaking the laws of computer physics and like getting this file uploaded faster than anybody else, right? Well, it turns out it had nothing to do with the technical stuff as much as it did with the user experience. So the UX team actually come up with the idea, and it was a clever UX hack. What they did is they said, hey, you know what? 90+% of the time, people upload the photo after they take it. So why are we sitting there waiting until they hit the upload button? Let's just upload. Second they take it, let's start uploading it. And then they can do what they want with the filters and the tagging and all this jazz. And we'll still have the upload button there, but by the time their finger hits it, that thing will have been uploading for 2 or 3 seconds. It'll seem like it uploaded 2 or 3 seconds more quickly, right? So that was the idea. It was a clever UX hack. And then it's like, hey, if they delete the photo, we'll just delete it on the back end of the server later. We'll figure it out later. But so they optimized that, right? So that was a performance because you could measure it, right? Cool. And then there's one last thing they did. Again, it's more subtle that made your photos look good. I'm wondering if anybody recalls. I know we kind of take this for granted now, but I remember when they did it, it was a big deal. I was like, what are you guys doing here? Okay, so it has to do with when you take your photos. So when you have a phone, it's a rectangle. And when you take a photo, it can be a tall rectangle like this, or it can be a wide rectangle like this, right? And I remember after a few people recommended checking it out, I was like, I got to check out Instagram now. And I went to take my first photo and I pulled it up and they cropped it to a square. And I was a little annoyed. I'm like, who gave you the right to crop my photo? No one's ever cropped any of my photos before without my permission. What's going on, right? Why did they do that? Well, the reason they did that is if you take some photos like this that are skinny and some photos like this that are wide, each photo itself is going to look good, especially with the filters. But when you have to combine those different photos into a single feed, that feed has a fixed width in pixels. And so these would not have to get shrunk down, but these wide ones, they'd have to shrink it down. So they knew it would look weird if some photos are shrunk down, but other ones aren't. So just to avoid that issue and make the feed look better, they said, let's just make people do square aspect ratio. So it was another way, a more subtle way to make your photos look good, right? All right. So what I want to do, I think we have what we need to recreate the problem space and solution space, right? So the problem space for Instagram, make my photos look good, supported by filters and square aspect ratio, post my photos quickly, supported by the photo upload UX hack. And now we have what we need to recreate Instagram's value proposition grid, right? So here we have all the other photo sharing apps. We have Instagram, must-haves, performance, and delighters. We actually didn't even talk about the must-have. If you're a photo sharing app, the must-have is you got to let me share my photos. Everybody does that. On the performance benefit front, we have post my photos quickly. Everyone else is low, but they're high because of the photo upload UX hack that nobody else had. And on the delighters, make my photos look good. Everyone else is not as good as they are because they've got the amazing filters and the square aspect ratio. So there's their unique differentiators right there, right? And so that's how I explain how they were able to enter a crowded market and shoot up to number one, because such a clear value prop. Remember I said, if you've got a clear outperform plus a delighter, it's a very powerful combo. This is an example of one of those cases, right? And interestingly, sometimes when I share the story, someone's like, how do we know this isn't just like 2020 hindsight revisionist history? Well, luckily for me at the time, in the same presentation where they talked about the UX hack, they shared the original tagline for Instagram. Now, I wouldn't expect anybody to remember it, but the original tagline for Instagram was fast, beautiful photo sharing, right? And I think this is a very great example of like powerful messaging. And they managed to basically, it's 4 words, but they managed to pack their whole value prop grid into these 4 words. They've got their must-have, photo sharing. That's what we do. We're photo sharing out. They've got the performance benefit. Hey, we're faster than everybody else, right? We upload faster. Our app runs faster. Everything's faster. We save you time. And then we've got our delighter. Beautiful. We make your photos look more beautiful than everybody else, right? So this is a great example of how you've got the product strategy, the value prop informing the product feature set as well as the messaging that they have, right? And so, like I said, in the product world, we're going to take that value prop and then go into talking about our feature set or MVP and then get into UX design. The path that goes sideways for messaging, we can then go into positioning. And so positioning is very closely related to the value prop. It's basically, how do you communicate your value prop? Which again is, hey, what's our product or service and how is it better than others, right? And there's a template for it I'll share in a sec, but basically it's a little more inclusive where you say what category your product's in. You again reiterate who your target market is. You get really clear about what's the core benefit or value your product provides. Remember, these are all things that were in the Amazon press release, if you recall. And then why it's better than competing products, unique differentiator, right? That's what we just got done talking about with value prop grid. So here's a traditional positioning template where you kind of like fill it in. It's like, so product name is a product category for target market that delivers blank core benefit by this unique differentiator, right? And so I just filled it out for Google. And so I said, Google is a search engine for everyone who uses the internet that helps people quickly find relevant information by having the best algorithms that deliver the fastest and most relevant results, right? This is an example of that. So it's just a way to, again, it's a template that you can fill out to make sure you're clear on, who's your target market and what's your core benefit and how you're going to deliver that in a way that's better than the competition, right? And so the thing about positioning and value prop grid, those are kind of internal documents and you need to do it. They're the documents where you do the thinking work, the hard thinking work of how are we going to position our product. Messaging is like another layer beyond that. So, you're not really meant to use positioning as is to just take your positioning that you work out internally and then go use that in your customer marketing. So messaging is like, okay, once you're clear on your positioning, now let's brainstorm and think about what specific words do we want to use to convey it, right? So it's kind of like this creative writing exercise after you do your positioning. And that's what kind of makes it hard. And that's why a lot of people don't do it. A lot of times they just take their positioning, and they put it out there. And so what you want to do is brainstorm your messaging ideas from your customer benefits. You want to try to you apply all the kind of creative techniques of divergent, iterative thinking, brainstorming, kind of like agile for messaging. And then at the end of the day, you have to write copy. And the reality is you end up needing copy means text. You need a different length messages. You need a tagline, like you saw the 4-word tagline. Sometimes you just need a short tagline. Sometimes you need a sentence. Sometimes you need a paragraph. Sometimes you need a page, right? And this reminds me of the Mark Twain quote, like, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. It's actually harder to write shorter things because you've got to make them, you've got to pack the right things in there. So some principles of good messaging, right? Good messaging, like what are the criteria that makes a message good or not good? It's easy to understand. It's got to be easy to understand. Focused, right? This is probably the toughest thing for people is, at most 2 concepts. Hopefully you can get it down to 1 concept or 2 max, right? If you try to jam 3 or 4 different concepts into a message, the customer's not going to remember any of it, right? There's too many things going on. You want it to be short, right? The shorter it is, the more memorable it is. Less is more. You want to clearly convey the benefits to the customer, and you want to sound differentiated, and you want it to be ownable by you, right? So the example, a case study I want to go through, I'm going to go through a case study where we can see this in action and decompose exactly the choices that were made, is the iPod. So does anybody remember, before I show it, anybody remember the iPod tagline? It was 5 words. Let's see if anybody, without Googling it, can remember it. Yes, Todd got it. There you go. Todd and Craig both got it. All right, close. Good. So Todd didn't know the number, but he got the other 4 words. Craig got all 5. Greg got the idea, a certain number of songs on 1 device. That's exactly right, right? So basically this was it. Say hello to iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? And the reason I share this is it's a brilliant example of messaging, 1,000 songs in your pocket. So here's the funny thing is, remember we've been talking about features and benefits. Do they mention any features here? I don't really see any features per se, right? Not your typical feature speak talking about features. And then here's the interesting thing is, do they mention any benefits explicitly? Do they actually tell you the benefit that it's going to do, right? And I don't think they really do explicitly. That's the interesting thing about messaging is one way to do it is you just explicitly say the benefit, but the more advanced, nuanced way to do it is you don't say the benefit directly, but you use words that make it really clear what the benefit is and invoke the benefit in the person's mind. And that's what they're doing here, which is why it's so impressive. Okay, let's deconstruct the message. The message is these 5 words, 1,000 songs in your pocket. There are really 2 parts to this message. There's 1,000 songs, that's one phrase, and in your pocket is the other phrase. Okay, for 1,000 songs, what I want you to do, what comes to mind? Why did they choose those words? What's evoked back then, not now, but back then when it came out, what did 1,000 songs make you think of? What would it evoke? What kind of reaction would it evoke? What would you think about that if somebody said, this thing holds 1,000 songs? What would you say? Yeah, so discs only had, like 12 songs. CDs only had 12 songs. So that's about 100 CDs, right? The equivalent of 100 CDs, equivalent of a shelf of CDs, lots and lots of records, right? Right. So we're putting it in terms of these other formats before the iPod of CDs and records. That's right. Right. Yeah. And so, I would say something, because we're focusing on songs, something like that's a large number of songs, maybe even all your songs at that point in time. Remember back then you have your library and stuff, like maybe that would be all your songs or a large number of songs. That's what they're trying to convey with 1,000. 1,000 is a big number for songs. And so that's what they're trying to convey. Now, if we were going to talk about this more like, a benefit or a capability, what would the benefit or capability be? Like a feature, a product capability or feature or benefit, like what would this fall into? From like an engineering standpoint, what would we categorize this as? I'm just watching what people are typing here or saying. Yeah, someone said size, right? Yeah, storage capacity, right? That would be the engineering way to say it, is storage capacity, right? And the specific value of storage capacity is 5 gigabytes, right? So think of this as like a spectrum of all the different ways they could have messaged it. They could have said 5 gigs in your pocket, right? They could have said highest storage capacity of anybody. They could have said a lot of songs, but they chose to say 1,000 songs. That's what they chose to do. So they deliberately chose to do that. But by doing that, they conveyed that, hey, it has a really big storage capacity, right? All right, how about the second side, in your pocket? When you hear in your pocket, what does that evoke? What does that make you think of? What benefits does that make you think of? On the go, small, mobility, portability. Yeah, small, right. Exactly. Yeah, carry with you anywhere, simple, easy. Exactly. Listen to it wherever you go. Exactly. Personalized, right? Yeah, it's portable, right? Because it's in your pocket. Your pocket's going with you everywhere. So if it's in your pocket, it's going with you everywhere. It's got to be small enough to fit in your pocket. It's presumably light, and you can listen anywhere, right? Everybody got there. Great. Everybody got those, right? Exactly. Cool. So what, if we think about storage capacity for number of songs, how would we characterize this as product attributes? What product attribute would this be? Yeah, Bart got it. Size. It's the size, right? Exactly, right? And if we wanted to quantify the size in geeky spec terms, we'd be like, okay, it's 4 inches by 2.4 inches times 0.78 inches. That's factually correct, right? That's correct. That's what it is, right? So imagine for a second, we've kind of decomposed these and what it makes you think about at these different levels, from more featurey, techie, geeky down here, working up to more colloquial speak and evocative speak up here, right? What if Apple had decided to message it at the green layer, right? Here's how that would have looked. Say hello to iPod, 5 gigabytes and just 4 inches by 2.4 by 0.78. This is accurate. It's not inaccurate. It's the truth. But does it get you as excited? Does it get you? It doesn't evoke the same reaction. What about if they've done it at the blue level, right? What if the blue level? Large capacity, small size. That's true. It's a little better. It's better than this one, right? It sounds better than this one because you're not mentioning the numbers and kind of getting the gobbledygook of the numbers in there, right? What about if they did it at this level, right? This orange level, right? That would be something like, hey, let you listen to a large number of songs when you're on the go. That's accurate, and it's true, and that's at the benefit level, right? So these are all alternative ways to do it, but they chose to go 1,000 songs in your pocket. That was even more powerful than this. Why? It was fewer words. They got the idea across in fewer words in an evocative way, right? So basically, they deliberately looked at this, and when they got to that point of saying, okay, it's a large number of songs and it's portable, you can listen anywhere, how are we going to message that? And they brainstorm a lot of different phrases to do it. And they specifically said, okay, we're going to do 1,000 songs in your pocket, because then most people are going to understand that, right? So that's the idea, is these different layers of what you can do. And so if we go back to like some kind of hierarchy where you've got your features, right? Like the 5 gigabits or whatever, you've got the benefits. Hey, a large number of songs, you can listen to a large number of songs. And then you've got, well, how are we going to message that? That's what I mean. Don't just take the benefit and do that directly to the user. Messaging is like this like finishing touch, is like a creative touch of what's the best way to convey that benefit to the user in less words and in an evocative way. Now, the interesting thing is, the iPod was so impressive. It actually had more benefits that they could have messaged that they didn't, that it was better than the other MP3 players. Can people think of other things? So they chose to focus on 1,000 songs in your pocket, large number of songs, and portability. But with the first iPod, it was so revolutionary. Can you think of other benefits or features it had that they didn't message? Let's see what people come up with. Long battery life. That's right. It definitely had a longer battery life than the other iPod, other MP3 players that were out there. Yes, it had the click wheel. That's right. Easy to use UI, right? If you remember, those old MP3 players are kind of hard to use. And they made this revolutionary click wheel so you could easily scroll through and go through menus and all this jazz. Yeah. Somebody mentioned the headphones. Yeah, the white headphones, right? Remember the ads? The ads, it was like a illustrated person. It was just like a profile of a comic book, but the white, white headphones. If you didn't have white headphones on, white earbuds on, you weren't listening to an Apple, right? Basically there. Yeah, somebody said desktop app. Yeah, auto sync, right? getting music onto and off of your, your device was a pain in the butt back then. And so what they did is with the iTunes software, you just plugged it in and it would automatically sync things up. If you made updates in iTunes, it would just automatically reflect it on your thing, right? Another kind of more techie geeky thing is how quickly was the data transferred? Well, they innovated FireWire, which was 30 times faster than USB as far as the data transfer rate, right? Somebody mentioned battery life, and we've got the earphones, right? So there are at least, in addition to 1,000 songs in your pocket, there were these 5 other things where it was basically way better than the other MP3 players. But did they try to get all these other things in there? No, why not? Because they knew that if they tried to communicate too many things, they would communicate nothing. And none of us remember, right? It's been so many years since this thing came out, and 3 people out of our group were able to quickly remember the tagline. That's the power of a great tagline, right? And so here's the quote from Steve Jobs. With iPod, Apple has invented a whole new category of digital music player, lets you put your entire music collection in your pocket and listen to it wherever you go, said Steve Jobs, right? With iPod, listen to music, never be the same again. So again, you see this, entire music collection in your pocket and listen to it wherever you go. This benefit speak, basically, right? So one way to think about positioning too is when you're doing this is you're not necessarily, if you have a lot of benefits like the iPod did, you decide which ones you're going to message. So it's like a filtering mechanism for decide which ones are we actually going to message, right? There's no right answer. They could have decided to do easiest to use if they wanted to instead, or the battery life. They could have picked something else, but they shouldn't have picked more than 2 because otherwise it would have gotten kind of complicated. And so again, they chose 1,000 songs in your pocket. Okay, now that's a very effective example. I have some other examples, and I have 7 examples of what I think are effective messaging. And I think the test of the effective messaging is, can you tell me, I'll just tell you the tagline, and let's see how many people can tell me which company it is. Okay, ready? All right, Fly the Friendly Skies. Can people tell me which one that is? See what people think. Yeah, Peter got it. United, right? Todd got it. United, right? So they were trying to say that they have the friendliest service and Fly the Friendly Skies. So we know. Cool. How about Zoom? Yeah, Greg got it right away. Mazda, right? It's that feeling of their cars, you get the zoom feeling. It's fun, it's sporty, it's responsive. How about Finger Licking Good? Yeah, everybody knew this. We have 4 people right away. KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. That's right. Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? So they didn't talk about food. They didn't talk about chicken. They didn't talk about, anything, the batter being fried, anything. It's just finger licking good. That's what it came down to. It's so good, you're going to lick your fingers. And it's funny because I remember going to an early talk on messaging, and speaking of KFC, somebody said, like, what if they had messaged it as like dead chicken parts? Like it's accurate, it's dead chicken parts, but it wouldn't be as, appealing as Kentucky Fried Chicken or finger licking good. Okay, next one up, the happiest place on earth. Everybody up, multiple people at Disneyland, right? Exactly, right? Yeah, great. And then Eat Fresh. Right, Greg got it again. Subway, right? It's like that was their big thing. These days there are a lot more places that have fresh food, but back then it was kind of not as a given in fast food. Have it your way. Someone got misattributed, right? There you go. So a couple people said Burger King. Exactly. Yeah, right. That was the whole point is, hey, you can say you don't want this, you don't want that. So you can customize your burger. They're making a big deal about that. Have it your way. So that was Burger King. And then last but not least, it keeps going and going and going. Energizer, right? Exactly. Yeah. And so it's for a battery. It's like, how can we communicate that our battery lasts longer than all the other batteries, right? They could have said, our battery lasts longer than all the other batteries. That would be like the benefit level. But they decided to go up a level, and how can we message it? And so they use it going and going, and they threw in an extra going just to kind of hit you over the head that it's going and going and going. So anyway, hopefully you can see some some examples of this. Hopefully you can use the techniques that I shared with you today here in this talk to, do a better job messaging your features and benefits. Your features and products. And so, yeah, so with that, I'm happy to open it up to questions. Is that Todd?
Yeah, this is Todd. My question is there much difference in B2B versus B2C? The examples you gave were great B2C examples, but what about B2B?
Right. Yeah. Well, so that's a good question. The one thing about B2B is you usually have a buyer persona, a target person, and you have like an end user. And so you need to think about the messaging that you've got for each of those, right? And yeah, and I think that in general, you don't see as advanced progress on messaging in B2B, although lately I do think there's a higher bar there for B2B companies. Talking about problem space, solution space, I was just speaking at a company offsite, and it's really easy for the sales team to fall into the feature checklist wars and go into the solution space checklist wars. And when you do that, you lose all the messaging. It just becomes, oh, they have a box that you're not checked and they have it, it becomes into that, which is solution space. So I think it can be easy to get sucked into the solution space in B2B. And so, but the same things apply. If you've done your value proposition and you know how you're outperforming the other competitors in your space, then you should be able to effectively message that, right? And if you can, then I think it's very powerful. So I'll have to go try to find some good B2B examples out there that I can share for the next version of this talk to add to it. But those are my thoughts basically. And then the wrinkle is you've got the buyer versus the user, right? That the buyer cares more about the value and financial benefits that they're getting. We can flip it around and be like Salesforce, like what's, what do they do, right? What is their tagline? Now, I think unfortunately, the other thing you can do with a message is you can just have a very high level message that doesn't really say much of anything. And I feel like oftentimes some B2B companies have that. And it reminds me of the Silicon Valley HBO show when the startup CEOs are on the stage and they're all saying the same thing. We want to make the world a better place, or make the world a better place. Like that's their kind of pitch. And it's like, or the other one they do is like, we're MoLo solo mo, like social, mobile, local, like this whole, and it just ends up being like this undifferentiated message that comes out. So you see that a lot out there. So so I'll try to think of some examples, but hopefully you should be able to apply the same techniques. Once you're clear on your value prop, you should be able to message it effectively against the other B2B competitors that you've got.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other question I had was, you'd said better than competitors, one of the early slides you had. And I wonder if it is not better than alternatives, because part of what you're trying to convince someone is to not let inertia set in. You want them to change their behavior, and that's not competition, or your competition is the status quo in that case.
Yeah, it depends. That's a good point. And that usually when I talk about, I think of substitutes or alternatives. And when I talk about, for example, TurboTax, it's funny because when I was at Intuit, Scott Cook was there, and one of the things he'd like to do when there was a group of people, he'd say, "Hey, I have a question for you." When he was at the end of giving a talk, "I have a question for you. Hey, who's the biggest competitor to TurboTax?" And most people would raise their hand and say, "It's TaxCut, another software package." And he's like, "No, you're wrong. It's pen and paper, because that's how more Americans are doing the taxes." Right? That's an example of a substitute or an alternative. So it kind of just depends. Like for a lot of products, there is some kind of manual thing that is the lowest common denominator that people are doing. It could be Excel, right? Could be pen and paper, could be whatever. So sometimes you're marketing against that. A lot of times there are other, software solutions in the market, so you're marketing against them. So you just got to decide where are you at in your category evolution. And in the earlier days of the category, you might be, like you said, convincing people to change from the status quo to a new solution offering. Kind of like cloud computing, right? When it's like, oh, I'm on-prem to going to cloud, and that was like a big shift. So you got to convince people why they should make that shift. And then now it's like the different cloud providers competing on why they're the best cloud provider, right? So once you get people to shift to the new platform, then it switches to more, well, how are you better than the other competitors that are out there? So, but thanks for your questions, Todd. Great. Okay, other questions? Somebody said, what resources do you recommend? So one thing is, we've had April Dunford on twice. She is like a positioning expert. So she has some great ideas. You can see her book is, I think it's called, let me pull it up. I think it's Obviously Awesome. I'm pretty sure that's the name of it. And so she's got a book, and there are 2 videos of hers on her YouTube channel. She doesn't necessarily go super deep in messaging, but she definitely covers positioning. And so I think that's a good alternative to check it out. Yeah, Obviously Awesome is the name of the book. Yeah. And then somebody said recommending building a story brand. on the chat here as well. Okay. Another question here from Dana. What is your recommendation for a company solving a real pain B2B that's relatively new in terms of solutions? So the product is composed mostly of delighters and not must-haves, but can be used as a complement solution to other products. Interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting. So there you're in a situation where you're trying to show how your product, in used in conjunction with other products, can complement it, right? So yeah, I think you should be able to do that. And it's a little different in the sense that it isn't all just your product offering. But that sounds good. It kind of I can't help but think of Reese's peanut butter. It's like, cups. So it's like peanut butter and chocolate. They're better together. So, something like where you point out how you can augment it. That a lot of times that comes up too in like some kind of app ecosystem where there are add-on apps, right, to a main app like Salesforce or plugins or things like WordPress or something like that, where you're relying on it. So WordPress plugins might be an example to look at where it's like, of course you've got to use WordPress. So that's kind of a given, but how do we make it better? How did this app make it better, right? So I would recommend checking that out. Those kind of scenarios where you've got like a plugin situation or an app ecosystem that's relying on a base platform that's there. Okay, let's see other questions people have. In a small team without product marketing, who should own positioning and messaging? Yes, that's a good question. That's the problem when you have a small team. Everybody's got to wear multiple hats, and so it's tough. I mean, on the one hand, it could be product management because we're the closest to the customers and we should be in charge of the value prop, but most PMs are not messaging experts per se, right? So one thing you could do is you could, as a PM, get to the value prop stage and then find some like messaging contract resourcer, right? That you could work with, a contract resource that you could say, okay, cool. But in order for them to do their job, they're going to need to know your value proposition, right? So that might be something, a solution that you can do. It's not like you constantly need to be messaging, right? So in an early stage startup or a small company, it might not be a full-time role. So that's yeah. If you have marketing can do it too, as another group that you listed there. But basically, somewhere between PM and marketing, and the smaller companies tend to be the people that would step up and fill in that gap.